All right, welcome one and all to another magnificent conversation of literature and media and beyond. Today we're going to be digging into science fiction, which in general sense seems quite large, but I believe is actually diverse enough for all of us to actually be able to bring in interesting perspectives on science fiction. And where this was birthed was initially a conversation of soft science fiction or soft sci-fi and hard sci-fi, which I'm sure we'll touch on uh, as a whole. But let's go ahead and see how our writers are doing today. Black Knight, how are you doing? What's new over there?
Oh, well, as you know, um, Tuesday is my editing day, and of course, I've been doing lots of edits all day and reading notes and stuff. And after I finished the reformatting and re-editing of my fourth Star Shatter book, Von Braun's Gambit, I have begun work on the fifth, Secrets of Autoria. And following the um, completion of some chapters, I also wrote the Terran Tuesday tanka from the comments um, taken from the first chapter of the second Vault Your Adventure novelette on Substack, The Province of Terrans, with a new character and everything. So, yeah, that's um, that's what I did today, apart from baking some bread and doing the odd chores and such. So, how about you?
I'm pretty good myself. Today I was running back and forth getting a dozen different things done. I even had to release myself for my premium subscribers. A little fun rompy tale from my alternate pen name, Butch Manley.
What?
And and part of a short series of ultra short stories, about 2,000 words long each. The Adventures of Billy Bob, a
Hmm.
a parody of dark Western times with an ultra masculine vibe. Just
Ooh.
released my second entry that is for premium subscribers only, but will be released for free at the beginning of next month, which is Billy Bob meets the Kung Fu Sasquatch. So you can go enjoy that for $5, or you can wait until the first of the month. And if you want to actually check out the first installment, which is already released for everybody to enjoy, it's Billy Bob kicks the devil's ass and punches his wife in the face.
Yes.
So
That is
you
just, oh my gosh.
you can check that out at worldwithoutendlore.substack.com. But um, RH Snow, how have you been? What have you been working on?
Well, first of all, I'm much better now that I've seen my little talking sandwich. Look at you. Look at your little face. That's so cute. And my Black Knight over there. I went over and said howdy at your Substack. Now I got to go visit yours, James, so I can go see what you made. Um, this all this excitement about what you're doing. So I spent a lot of this week. Have you ever gotten so deep in the weeds with your work that you actually don't really know what it is that you can't really describe it? Like for instance, I've been drawing, which I had to be in the right mindset to make illustrations. And so I'm finishing out my illustrations. I usually draw all the ones that come to mind first, and then I go back and I go, okay, what scenes are kind of missing where people might go, gee, you really haven't, there's a character that you haven't really explored in this book. What you might want to, represent them in an illustration. And so I have to go back and sort of plug the holes. So I have about 3 holes that I have to plug before I can turn all of it in and get it in. So I've been going back through that, and it's sort of I have to get myself in the mindset for that. But then I also promised some people that I'm doing some arc reads, and I do a very very few arc reads for people because I'm there. Usually it's just because I love you so much, and I just have to do it. You're my friend, and because I read very little when I'm writing this series. I've been reading just enough to get in trouble, and so I've been doing the arc reads on that, and did some editing for another writer, looking through his stuff and saying, hey, just do this. And so I had that, and I was really proud of getting it done. but then I feel like, oh, I didn't get enough done, and so I feel really, kind of like, all I did was draw and read all week, and it's like, but that's what I do. So I was like, okay, so I guess I did something. And I wrote a lot of poetry this week. I wrote some haiku. I took photos because it was cold earlier when we had the snowstorm and everything. We had to make our way through all that, and we didn't really get any snow, so we kind of had to just sort of sit around and watch. So I got to do that. But the most important thing, this is the most important thing I did this week, was I sat down with my daughter and my daughter-in-law, and I did something I never really do. I watched a chick flick. I watched Anne of Green Gables, which I have never read. And actually, it was really, my mother loved this book. My daughter loves this book. My daughter-in-law loves this book. Everybody loves Anne of Green Gables. They're just fascinated with it. It's like a woman thing. You have to love Anne of Green Gables. It's so wonderful. And I loved it, but I realized it was the first movie I've seen in probably 15 years that there weren't any guns in it. There were no gunfights. There was no fist fighting. I don't know why. I have a really hard time with chick flicks. And so I watched the 1985 version. So if any of you all have seen it, Anne of Green Gables with the 1985 Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's their version of it in the miniseries, and actually I liked it. So if you saw that, or if you've ever read it and you loved it, it was kind of weird to actually like something like that and to enjoy it and to admit that I enjoyed it, because I have usually my readership is almost is a lot of my readers are male. I have a pretty good mix, but a lot of my readers on Twitter are almost there's like 75% male. And so it's really weird to look at that and then go, okay, I'm watching a chick flick. That's really awesome. So if you've seen or read Anne of Green Gables, let me know, because I liked it, and I want to feel cool about it. That I watched something girly and I liked it.
Okay. So a bit of an adventurous weekend.
Yeah, if you could call it that. Normally, I'm really, really bored with stuff like that. I don't know why. I just have a hard time watching. So I was proud of myself. I did something girly. Woo!
How fun. Anyways, so let's get on to the spectacular conversation at hand, which is science fiction and literature and media. When I say that alone, like 20,000 different titles pop into my head, from whimsical to sci-fi terror and beyond. So I myself can't wait to dig into this topic, because I think it's actually, in the modern age, I think this has kind of become the go-to genre for almost every type of medium out there. It seems to be a popular science fiction that has really kind of taken over a lot of, I guess, what you'd call the genre stuff. Like everything falls underneath fantasy or science fiction. This is a broad terminology.
I think that we have to look at the actual history of this. And of course, I say that every week. And so you're waiting for me to say that. Yes, we want to go back and we say, what is science fiction? It has become it's the hallmark, I think, of when we think of the 21st century, the 20th century, cutting edge. Things move towards the future. It moves towards what we believe is going to happen. And while we enjoy looking back at the past or having historical romances, or like Anne of Green Gables, something that is a reminiscent of another time, our vision lies forward, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars. The worlds of science fiction are in the future for the most part. Now, there are retro versions of it. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Notably, where you go to isekai, where you go back in time and you take your tech with you. But for the most part, it looks forward. And it reflects the view of the future that the people who are current in that time, the authors of that time, have that vision of their future. And so it's a really great way to explore the culture. But what we a lot of times don't realize is that science fiction really does go back a long, long way. Some people will say it goes back to Gilgamesh or to some of the mythoses that they have, because it explores the fantastic. But I think that's more in the realm of fantasy, when they go to the world and it's a supernatural world, or a crossing over without any mechanical or technical aspects. I have a tendency to think of that as fantasy, and a lot of other genre literature people do. But we can actually say that there have been some works that could be considered science fiction that go back as far as the 2nd century AD, specifically Lucian. who writes about spiders and this intergalactic wars, and he was Syrian Greek. You also have Hindu works. They're awesome in the fact that they actually have machines that fly, that are that there's interplanetary travel, and there's a intergalactic war basically in the Hindu mythos. So you start to sort of touch towards the that science fiction mode of machinery and mecha. And we've had this vision for a long time. We really don't realize how far back this goes. And in fact, you have there. Ramanaya is the one I'm actually trying to think of that had flying machines, and they were able to destroy it had like wave motion guns on them, which is actually really cool. And I really want to go back and actually read an illustrated Ramayana. I have to say it, Ramayana. And I want to go back and look at that because I actually reference it in Watcher the Damned. One of my characters references the Rama. So we have those works that are way back there, like 4th, 5th century before Christ. And so when we're talking about science fiction, people imagining worlds with other than organic life or other than organic forms on them, this goes back a long ways. But that birth of it as an everyday thing where it's more than just a sacred or a supernatural interaction, where it becomes people make something and it creates a world that could be destroyed. I think that pretty much belongs to the 20th century. We see a little bit of that in Jules Verne, where they make fantastic machines that have the capability to destruct. And of course, we see it. Mark Twain's work. If you haven't really had a chance to look at Twain, is as a science fiction writer, and I've mentioned this before. His work with a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, where he takes his tech back and creates machinery that he can use to dominate that world. I think is probably one of the first Western isekais. Of course, there's Japanese isekai where they go back into different worlds, and it sort of trends towards fantasy most of the time with a few science fiction elements in it. But go back and read Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee, King Arthur's Court, and then go back and read some of Jules Verne's work, because that's where we really start to say American science fiction. Those roots of machinery and technology being a power for good as well as evil in the hands of the common man, not just in the hands of gods. And I think that's where the differentiation is in most of our other early works for the Ramayana or for Lucian. These are things that are supernatural. They dwell among the gods. In American or Western science fiction, the power can come from ordinary humans because they can create this technology that has the power to save and to destroy. And so I think that's kind of that defining point where we can say we'll take it out of the realm of the ancient works, and we can say that Western work of tech in the hands of the ordinary man is what defines this present age of science fiction.
Yes, indeed. And look who we have on. Hello, Maji-Chan.
Hey,
What? Maji!
Hey, sorry, I'm a bum. I fell asleep on the couch and then I woke up. I'm like, something I was supposed to be doing. Why do I feel like I'm late?
oh boy.
On your Twitter after 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, I saw your Christmas thing. I was like, hi. And I was like wondering if you're going to be on today. I love you, Maji.
I love you too. Yeah, no, I was a bum. I fell asleep after lunch.
Okay, good. Tell us right now. What is science fiction, Maji?
Well, it depends on what you think about it. So technically, like I came in late to your thingy. Science fiction is one of those things. Basically, technically, like Wizard of Oz could be considered science fiction. It is a work of imagination that's created dealing with technologies and things beyond our normal natural world. It tends to lean more on the sciences versus the fantasies. But like I said, technically Wizard of Oz could be considered a science fiction, especially considering when it was written and the technology used in it, and then now compare it to today.
Well, now you're right about this. I read the first of the Frank L. Baum's works, and actually read the originals. And that was belonged to my neighbor. It was just beautiful little set of books, and it has a lot of machines in it. It really does. They create things, and especially the Scarecrow. His character, as he has his brain, as he goes into the later books, he's an inventor, and of course, you have the wizard as well, who invents technology to create this fantasy world. And so I hadn't really ever thought of it as being a science fiction work until I saw where they were talking about how the wizard is creating all these things and it looks like magic to them, but in reality, he's the man behind the curtain. And yeah, there's sort of that sudden, that aha moment where you realize, well, this is not magic. There's magic in the world, but an ordinary man created with technology, this kingdom basically of incredible power based on his ordinary machines.
So it's more of Magitech fantasy than if you have both magic and technology. And I'm talking about magic, not magic.
Well, it's not even
not space magic.
It's not even that though. I mean, think about it. Steampunk and dieselpunk; those are forms of science fiction and not necessarily fantasy.
Well, yeah, and steampunk goes back to Jules Verne. I was just actually looking at this earlier, because one of the things that people, if they haven't read Jules Verne, they're in for a treat. Need to go and read Jules Verne, because that's where that steampunk image comes from. Modern technology for them was steam, was balloons, trying to make a submersible, and they hadn't even really gotten the tech down yet. And so that's when they were using their own everyday technology. You're going back to the technology of the Victorian era and combining it with science fiction and fantasy. That's steampunk. And so they burst their own genres. And in the process, not only, at first it's just called science fiction. And then later on, we start to develop the steampunk genre as its own special group. But I think that a lot of people haven't really, even though they love steampunk, I think a lot of people haven't really gone back to explore Verne's and H.G. Wells' work. And that's something that if you love that genre, you need to go back and read them, especially Verne, but also H.G. Wells.
Yeah. It's I had recently read bits and pieces from 2000 Leagues Under the Water, because I needed it for another project of mine, a secret project, which I'm totally not going to divulge any information about. And I was once more amazed at the flow of the dialogue of Verne, and his ability to weave the plot into pretty much everything. It's, as you said, it's a must read, especially for lovers of old school science fiction. You you won't be disappointed unless you're looking for something else. But indeed, especially the entire submersible thing, it's masterfully done, and the way it's described, and the exposition, the essential exposition he does, it's masterclass. You can I know people who dealt with, like, surfed on submarines, and one of them, he was he had a model of Jules Verne's submarine, which he built based on the descriptions and how he actually envisioned it to be, the shape wise. but he actually built a model of this just based on Vern's descriptions. So indeed, it is quite good.
Now, I have a fascination with Vern's submersibles because my father actually, in addition, my father was an engineer. He was a design engineer. He worked on the Apollo 11 project. He worked on the Saturn V rocket engine specifically. But he also worked on other projects with the U.S. government. Since these are now declassified, it's okay for me to talk about it a little bit. One of these was the Tree Stay submarine, which if you have not heard of the Tree Stay was a submarine that actually delved into the Marianas Trench, was the only submersible to ever make it down to the bottom of the sea for many, many decades until James Cameron's submersible, I believe. And so he worked on the submersible. Jules Verne's work was very instrumental in my father's life as well, because Verne's work was done as a precursor to most submersible technology. We had just really started getting involved with submersible technology during the Civil War. You see a little bit of it before. They were creating subs, but they really weren't working that way. So what he's writing about is contemporary to him. It would be the same as if we were writing about travel to Mars. We haven't yet made it, but we have the technology to get there. Well, Verne's work with the submarines, when he writes about it, he's writing about something that has not really yet been perfected. The ability to go below the waves and travel under the sea was so mind-boggling to them. It still is an unexplored realm. When you look at the Marianas Trench, look it up. It's the deepest part of the ocean, a huge rift, 30,000 feet deep. And this magnificent hole in the earth with life still down at the bottom of it. We haven't fully explored it. My father's work on the Tree Stay actually involved the triply redundant safety systems that kept the men alive when they first started coming back up. He put in safety systems that if some in part of it failed, the next one would be there as a backup. And his models and Verne's models are so closely related because Verne was looking ahead of where they were at that time. That is the miracle of science fiction, is it is using techniques or elements that are available to people to create something ahead of themselves. And it is not just a piece of literature, although literature is very important. It shapes what people do. They see these stories about things that do not yet exist, and they say, I would like to do this. I want to go there. And they create from the images that they read about and what they see and create things that actually exist. So when we write science fiction, when we write these stories, we are writing the future. Whether or not we want to admit it, we are actually writing in someone's future. Someone, if they read our story and they imagine what would it be like to live in that place, to be in that world, we are possibly creating something that will inspire someone to make a world. And that is a very wonderful and daunting prospect.
Yes, indeed, and that's why I often call or label, give the science fiction the label spirit of truth and hope, more like hope. First, spirit of truth is reserved more for the fantasy, the pure fantasy, but the science fiction is a spirit of hope. Because, as you know, from the stories of engineers who became engineers because of Star Trek and developed stuff like touch screens and mobile phones and such before there weren't anything like any even remotely similar technology except like portable radio maybe, but it was a freaking backpack. It's like heavy, bulky, and many people today forget that it's like the old school science fiction authors, they had vision. They could envision technologies and the application of an extrapolation of their current tech into something truly groundbreaking, which actually helped genius engineers to uh, build working tech. And this is one of the wondrous things about science fiction.
Yeah, science fiction kind of like a lot of the minds who wrote about it in the past kind of built off of the science that was or the science that they see in the future where mankind would go. And a lot of it's also based off of kind of where they are in time and space. Like we spoke about it in a previous stream about how I said like we're kind of there. We've achieved so much of that science fiction world they wrote about in the past, but in the past they didn't have anything like the internet to work off of, and they would come up with ideas like the internet in I believe it was Geomancer, um, which is one of the first or considered like the first the first cyberpunk book out there. Or no, it was Neuromancer. My bad, Neuromancer was the first cyberpunk book out there that kind of came up with this idea of the internet, which is essentially kind of where we ended up because all these great advancements that we're surrounded by are less physical like we expected them to be in the past, and they're more digital, as everything that kind of like our modern day is running off of seems to be computers, computer based. Even now, if I step inside of a Taco Bell, my local Taco Bell, they have a digital menu for me to interact with if the line's too long so they can get my order in there. So there's like all these advancements of science fiction, like you said, that we've already reached. And it's also a great way to pull inspiration from. I think on the darker edge of sci-fi you have Lovecraft, and he was heavily inspired by the scientific discoveries they were making at that time. I believe Color Out of Space was inspired by the discovery of UV rays, and when they're first discovered, there's mystery behind them that can spark interesting, unique, and horrific ideas to pull from. And that's one thing I actually tell some people, because I spent so much time studying Lovecraft, less so because I like Lovecraft, but a lot because a lot of other people around me like Lovecraft and his major influence. And he was heavily influenced on groundbreaking science of the day. And I say tell people, you want to write like Lovecraft, look at groundbreaking science of the day and imagine the most horrific aspects thereof. You'll be pulling from very similar sources.
Ooh, I never thought of it that way because there's so many horrible things that can happen. So I guess I shouldn't do that. That would make me sort of scared.
Yeah, it's if you remember, I'm not sure if I mentioned it. I think I did. One of my first dystopian sci-fi stories was inspired by a magazine, like a tech magazine, futurist, with futurist articles about nanotechnology. I read an article about, like a lengthy article about nanotechnology, and it was like, it was well written, well researched. It was like over 20 something years ago, like about in the 2000s. Um, and they would um, write about what they like, what the current state of the tech was, and then there were a bunch of like um, uh, journalists who were dealing in new technologies, and they would get an engineer to weigh in and give them the his or her uh, like opinion, and then at the end, like that was my favorite part of their articles, was a futurist. I think he was one of the older sci-fi authors here in the country, I can't remember the name, but he was actually, I think he was writing short stories, short sci-fi stories. He was pretty good with like mysterious sci-fi, and he would always give like the probably the worst outcome of that technology, while at the beginning of the article like the journals will be like, yeah, it's glorious, it's going to revolutionize our world, like the way we live. And in the end he was like, no, you idiots, like these like there will be like some idiots who will misuse it, and like some evil types who would try to do this and that. And I was like, wow, that was really dark. That was depressing, but it helped me. And the way he described it, it was almost as if he could envision how badly like these like bureaucratic and corporate types who always misuse new technology and new knowledge would screw up. Like he would probably see inside their heads. I don't know. It was that he was that good.
Yeah, it's kind of like the what I would call the Stargate future versus, or the Stargate method of sci-fi versus the Star Trek method of sci-fi. Where Star Trek, this world of endless abundance, and you're exploring the universe, and Stargate is you've unlocked technology far beyond your capabilities. It ends up in the hands of the military and is used for secret operations to gain military technologies to advance primarily the
Yeah, and
military.
it causes evil aliens to invade.
And it causes evil aliens to invade, and you get caught up in an intergalactic war. Yeah,
Yep,
very
yep,
much so. Yes,
yep.
that's kind of what I really like. I think in science fiction, the kind of sci-fi I'm drawn towards is kind of the military sci-fi. That stuff always kind of gets me going because it's not necessarily just like the military aspect. Because I read a lot of military-based stories, but there's something about the military sci-fi that brings in this space opera tone that I really enjoy. And I know that your world has a bit of that, Black Knight.
Oh
What are some of
yes.
your actual inspirations, military-wise, that you pull from
Ah,
for your various factions and stuff?
well, I created um, this is like a secret super organization, military organization for Star Shelter, which was created in the beginning of their version of the Second World War. It's called Squad Zero, because it was like that was like a mask, supposed to be some fictitious squad for like the arranged for special operations from people gathered from like operators gathered from all the um, countries of the axis of justice. And they would like the Soviets and their allies were like, oh, so wait, this is just some super secret special operation team, and that's okay. Um, well, if our spies would gather more information about it, like we will for sure will try to stop them, to destroy them. But they never even didn't like imagine the scope of it all. Um, it's it's more of an XCOM style organization, but set in the Star Shutter universe. And it's not that they had secret bases all over the globe. They had a few, and as like, how should I put it? They would operate in some ways similar to the Stargate project, to some level, but they wouldn't poke too much in space, at least in the beginning. And I was heavily inspired uh, from reading stuff I found, and um later some like pseudo secret documents about the cooperation of the Soviet Union and the United States on the UFO front. Yes, I know. Some of these are fake. I know that they're fake, but what can I say? They were well written. I don't know who wrote them, but they did a good job. It was interesting. And so this is how that organization was born. It's There are no civilians in this organization, pretty much all military from all across the world, and even renegade Soviets who escaped the regime. And I'm talking the Second World War. I mean, of course, the organization still exists after that, but its mandate was and still is to deal with monsters, cryptids, ghosts, and alien threats. And I'm talking spooky alien threats of, let's say, uh, Lovecraftian type, because there are such in Star Shuttle. And this they achieved via a combination of military technology, advanced military technology, um, special operators, telepathic special operators, and various types of space magic. And of course, later some competent alien help from allies, also military. So, without dropping too many spoilers, that's about that organization. I think Maji-Chan read a story about it in my first anthology, a mandate of Sword and Dragon. There is a story which touches like a little bit on that side of things. It's about the commando who was recruited. He is recruited by the organization after he bumps into stuff, alien stuff, creepy stuff, and survives it. And he's extracted, and he's um, given the talk. It's like, well, son, there's things. If you choose to say that you didn't see them, it's fine. Everything will be fine. But if you want to know more about it, and meet with other people who can actually say that they saw and fought these things, well, you have to sign over here, like sign this document, and we will so yeah, you'll become part of this group that doesn't exist, and You get to go on certain missions that would never be uh, well, at least they back then during the war they assumed that wouldn't be nothing they like nothing would be revealed to the public. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of crazy stuff happened around World War II. That's excellent to pull from for your various scientific and clandestine operations. That's for sure.
Well, actually, that's where you have Gene Roddenberry going for his basis of Star Trek. As of course, like I said, you know that he was a fighter pilot, and he actually, I think, he flew a bomber, and he was, of course, and that means he got all the ladies, and which he did. But he wrote that whole world based on his love of the giant airships and the things that he flew, and also the different military aspects of the U.S. in World War II. And so that bleeds heavily into his world. And that's the reason why so many of our pictures that we have of the future as being militaristic and the structure of his world based on post World War II America is where that bright image of a confederation of peace loving nations that will come together and they're going to go explore that comes out of that. But his experience as a pilot in World War II shapes him so completely as a science fiction writer. And his influence in that genre it really can't be overstated. He had that actual knowledge. You talked about the radios being like backpacks. My father also was a radio operator during World War II, and he had one that was just about as big as he was. He weighed like maybe 115 pounds soaking wet, and the pack was I think like 75 to 90 pounds, depending on what it was. Just for the stuff. It was huge. He was yeah, I know it's huge. And so Gene Roddenberry is coming from that world. That's his technology. This giant radio. For him to be envisioning the scanners and the things that we have that now we do have. It's living in our world right now.
Yeah, we have LiDAR scanners, hand scanners.
Yes. And it's just incredible that world that he's coming from. We've also got to remember that computing was very early at that point. We had card punch. We didn't have a computer as we think of it, where you can just plug something in and the formulas are going to come back. We did have some, but those calculations and things were run by and large without computers, without calculators. They were created by engineers and scientists. And the idea of having a computer run these for you, to just put it in and have it come back. Now it's ubiquitous, but at the time it wasn't. So when you're talking about those writers, it's from the perspective where they are, the technology that has shaped them, and they are creating a world beyond that. So we are here in this world where there are scanners and there's AI coming and there's you can talk to a computer now and it will give you a picture. You can say, draw me a picture of a cat eating a bagel while it flies over New York, and it will give it to you. So we're starting to get to that Star Trek world where you can just ask the ship's computer to give you anything and it will. What are we going to envision from where we are with all of these things in front of us? What is the future we envision? And for a lot of us, it's actually a very dark future because we see a world where technology has peaked and then it starts to degrade human life because it's thinking for us, it's creating for us, it's doing all these things. All that's left for humans to do is to do the drudgery and the hard work. All the good things have been taken over. So how are we going to envision that world? How is it going to shape future technology? We're actually shaping that technology as writers. What's our vision and how are we giving it out? Because I think that we underestimate the effect of authors and creators on policy and future societies.
Yeah, definitely. Black Knight, you touched on it. How basically, I think we've all touched on it a bit. The future is inspired by sci-fi, and sci-fi is inspired by what we think of the future. Like the popular knowledge, the cellular device, cell phone, was inspired by the Star Trek communicator. Now each of us has one in our pockets almost all the time now.
Yeah, it's time for the freaking scanner.
Well, think about it. The smartwatches. How many of us thought it was unheard of that you could talk into your watch when we were kids?
Yes, that too.
Yeah. We always thought it was spy stuff or
The
Power
drones.
Ranger stuff.
Drones. The drones. Remember the
True.
drones?
Yeah, drones.
And,
Half the technology in the Sylvester Stallone Demolition Man movie we have.
Yep, the self-driving
that's
cars, which are fucking like shit. They're shit. You just like, if you want to see how these technologies will and can screw up and create like a dystopian future, you just have to look at China. Just look at China. They're implementing all of these technologies, and pretty much all of them fail spectacularly. They have more like, I don't know. According to some data I read a few months ago, they say it's between 3 to 5 times more car accidents because of the self-driving cars. They fail constantly. Their software fails because they're like, everything is run by AI for quote unquote efficiency. The cars stop mid travel to upload to download updates or something. They suddenly glitch, even if the driver like wants to drive it manually. They suddenly glitch and switch to autopilot, and they create accidents. It's insane. Just look at that. They had, I think they had security drones, like quote unquote police drones, robots, actually walking robots or wheeled robots, and these would also glitch and attack or chase random people on the street or in the malls or wherever. It's madness. Well, you also, like, in their defense, you can argue that because they're communists, they kind of cut some corners, so to speak, and build, like, hurriedly build stuff, and they don't think ahead. But they're not stupid. They have good engineers. It's just that a lot of these technologies, they're not as useful as some people once thought. I mean, if you use them in combination with the human input, yes, then they are supremely useful. Especially during like accidents or environmental disasters or military use used in combat to save lives or to take lives. For example, the now infamous FPV drones, which you can pretty much use for a lot of purposes, which back in the day, people assume that, yeah, that's just a cute drone. I can take pictures from, like, and make videos, and maybe Amazon will like fly these drones and deliver my packages. I can order takeout, like from the Chinese restaurant or whatnot. And now these drones, they are not just kamikaze drones and blowing up tanks and stuff. or dropping grenades on people. They are actually dropping supplies or delivering important items. You have even drones who are designed to like land drones, like wheel drones, or designed to carry wounded out of the battle zone and deliver supplies, and it's it's insane. And I am not aware if you know that some of the Terminator stuff actually became real last year on the battlefield. You had literally Terminators, tanks, armed vehicles who were pretty much autonomous, and they were fighting. They were used in battle. Eh, so far as their effect, like efficiency, they weren't like supremely effective. They were effective. They achieved some results, but for now, they are quite not yet to like to like max Terminator levels. Thankfully.
Yeah, that's definitely scary, rushing towards that sci-fi. But I was thinking when you're talking, anybody know the author who predicted the science fiction future dystopia where everything's supposed to work but doesn't?
Oh,
Um,
uh,
I didn't know there would be a quiz.
wait a minute. Is
It has
was
to be
it?
Doug Adams.
Uh,
Doug Adams or Terry Pratchett.
It seems like everything's been pre-written and predicted. So I'm thinking, oh, I wonder who wrote that future.
Oh well, I don't know. You mean the part where you make something and it just all falls apart and goes terribly wrong? Actually, Doug Adams comes really close to that. Things happen and they don't happen quite the way they're supposed to. Terry Pratchett's worlds, frequently things happen where they're sort of out of whack. Things that the parts of the machinery don't mesh as well as they should sometimes. In Watcher of the Damned, where we actually incorporated Murphy's Law as an actual law. If it was magic, it would definitely be in there, because no matter what you do, there's always something that's going to go wrong. And you have to build around that with your plot lines and everything else. So with science fiction, it really should be part of the story, because you're going to have something go terribly wrong. If you're, no matter what you're working with, there's always a glitch. There's always an error of some kind. And that's even with equipment that's up to date, that's been just made in the last year, that's just been put out, that's had all the updates that it's supposed to have.
especially in that equipment, and especially if it's a military equipment.
That's right.
You know that all too well.
Yes, and so we have that, and just the breakdown of old technology. I think that we don't talk about that as often. We talk about body horror, but we don't talk about tech horror. It happens actually in the Halo universe, where Cortana is falling apart as she's trying to help John. That last time where she's welcome home John, she's actually dying, and she's falling apart, and she's so fearful of disintegrating or losing herself in this process. There is a horror to that cyber technology suddenly stops working, that your phone doesn't work anymore. You look over and all of the maps that you're using are no longer available as part of that apocalyptic world. What happens when things revert? What happens
when your cybernetic augmentation don't work?
That's right, when your cybernetics stop working. And that actually is an issue, and it's part of it was written into Watcher of the Dam for that reason, that things do go wrong. And I think one of the earliest examples of this, actually, let's talk about Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's fantastic work, actually should be considered a science fiction story. It's a story of a man who assembles body parts, sewing them together to try to create life. And since it's using medical science, he is a mad scientist. As part of the mad scientist genre, I think we could probably look at that, and that's where it goes wrong. That he actually creates this creature, and this creature becomes. He's not attempting to do it just because he wants to be godlike. He's trying to do something scientific. So I think we actually have to say that Frankenstein would be considered a science fiction story. If you're talking about things that go wrong, where there's something that's incorporated, then you'd have to look at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where he's making these scientific potions and he ends up becoming addicted to them, and it creates a monster of himself that possibly could involve, I would say that could possibly be called science fiction as well, but it's definitely that part where it goes wrong, that science introduces something that man is not yet ready to handle, and it goes wrong, terribly wrong. And I think it's actually part of the genre itself, is the glitch, the what didn't work, what happened that didn't quite
Yeah,
work the way it should.
the bad science.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the, I guess what you'd call like the universal horror monsters of the past come from. At least three of them I can think of. You know, like you mentioned Frankenstein, um, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and then there's also the Invisible Man. All three,
Oh,
Oh
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
and all three kind of deal with sort of like the moral implications of it all as
Oh,
well.
don't forget the fly.
Oh, yes, the fly. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, yeah. When you put
Yeah.
yourself in a machine and you come back and you look, you're a mess. You're a mess. The early transporter problems. We haven't done. I know they've had to touch on that where the transporter goes wrong and somebody's just inside out, just a
It's,
bubbling pile.
I mean, the transporter. It's a death machine.
It is. It
It
really
does.
is.
It doesn't actually transport you. It just creates a copy of you.
Yeah, you're not really you anymore. You don't seem like
Yeah.
yourself lately. No, I just got transported.
Like every time you're transported, you die.
I
But
never thought about that until that came up. Like, wow, that's really dark. They're just all copying
it's
themselves.
they're just like, yep, they're not real. They're not real. The real them anymore. But to touch upon the last thing that you mentioned, Snow, about the digital horror. Um, well, I did write about. We talked about the rogue AIs, like the mad AIs, but then you have these the slow degradation of software. Uh, in it's like it happens. It did happen to us. Remember how many times your like the Windows you had to reinstall the Windows of your computer back in the day. Now it's a bit more stable. Like it's more stable, but
Yeah.
you still have to. Yeah, you still have terrible issues with, and especially with the apps. Oh boy. And now imagine you have a ginormous galactic network, and you have quadrillions upon quadrillions of quintillions of apps, and then operating systems and everything, like software from thousands of different civilizations, most of them dead, long dead, and all of this is on the galactic internet, and it's rotting there.
Oh wow.
There's
And,
definitely a horror aspect of that.
and then you have the consciousness, like the souls of people who got trapped, or who thought that they would, oh, I'm going to be immortal, I'm going to upload my consciousness on the internet, haha, and something something wrong happens. Something bad happens, of course.
Yeah, I think they touch on that in the book Neuromancer when they have a hacker who had essentially sold. I believe he sold a copy of his subconscious that was just held on a memory bank for whenever they needed it, and his subconscious just endlessly suffered in this sort of parallel existence where he just can't do anything.
Well, I got one for you.
Ooh, wait.
So this one kind of makes you think a little. Have you guys
Transformers?
read Wrangler's book?
I have not yet read Wrangler's book. I've read the book.
Sadly not yet.
I've got it
So
in my to be read pile, though. It's like right at the top.
Wrangler's book takes mythology, theology, science fiction, and adds a little bit of fantasy. So, where you have stuff that crosses over into the different categories like that, what category is it mainly classified as? Because in his book, his leans more towards science fiction, but he's got all these mythology gods in it that's interacting with the humans, but you have these space aliens invading Earth from another dimension, from another parallel universe, and he actually has like second density and third density and just things to think about because
he did such a you go ahead.
No, you're good.
No, he did such a fantastic. I've read parts of it. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I just got to read the snippets of it, and he blends so well. Wrangler has done this. I don't know how to say it. There are books that are genre defiant. They bust genres, and his is one of those. He actually weaves all of that in and out. Because he's got elements of mythos, he's got elements of fantasy, he's got elements of science fiction, and he manages to weave them all together so well. You're not really sure what is this book I'm reading. Is it science fiction? Is it fantasy? And it's actually all of them. And it's cool because he managed to do that in such a way that you really you don't know which genre it is, but you don't care. It's just fun to read.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is with sci-fi, it can be sprinkled into all the genres. That there's enough, if you add just enough science and enough stuff into it, it can bleed into the other sciences because there's parts and aspects that can develop in that human technology. But I just wanted to bring his book into it because he's one of those that plays on the line. Well, is it fantasy or is it science fiction? Because he does set it up to be a science fiction with the parallel universes and the alien invasions, but he does also mix in a ton of theology.
Yeah, we had like, I mean, we hadn't had enough talks with him, which I think we should. And when we talked about our books, the book universes, I found out that aspect that it's quite similar to Star Shattered 2 because we have. I mean, I do have like a fainter theological aspect to it, and you have, of course, the supernatural, but he deeps deeper. Of course, I also delve deep in certain things, but I won't drop spoilers. Yeah.
Well, I love the thing that I think, and we see this here with all four of us. I'm going to sort of broach the subject. Science fiction, as Maji said, you can sprinkle it into anything. But each of the authors here, because Maji is an author too, and we're talking about
Not really.
Yes, you are. You cannot deny it. I have read your book, so you're just going to have to deal with your life. And each one of us has actually created what I would call genre busters. We have blended genres. We're breaking out of these molds, and this is a new trend that we're seeing more and more of breaking away from a pure just this is the genre, this is how it fits in, to these blended genres where the elements are there. And well, certainly we still have a lot of our hard science fiction guys. Carl K. Gallagher, I would say, is one of them that has a little fantasy in it, but I could literally probably build a spaceship based on what Carl K. Gallagher is written. And still have our hard science fiction genre people, our high fantasy, low fantasy, but we are starting to see more and more this blending of genres as you're wiping out the old categories that the publishing houses use to sell their books. And with the fall of the publishing houses, and this is a real thing, and I think you read about it this week. Once again, we released these numbers about 20% of published authors will only sell maybe 50 books. Most of us have been far beyond that. But publishing is dying. For an average author, for anybody who's out there, it's far better to be in the indie world. And indie authors, because we no longer have to follow those constraints of publishers, we're writing our own genres. And so we're going to start seeing these become more about elements, less about a template where you have to become this particular kind of author and you have to have this story. But instead, you're going to have elements that are woven into it. Like for instance, in Maji's story, where she has fantasy, but you also have elements of I would say that science fiction element is still in there, especially where you're doing where they have the interactions between them and the world they're in. And I know that's with Star Shatter. It's definitive. You are a science fiction space fantasy with theological elements. Wrangler actually, where he breaks loose and really breaks free is in his theological element, where he brings that into the world. And actually, it's kind of like an incense punk. Yuval Kordov, who's actually writing Incense Punk, which is a new thing now, which blends science fiction with religious and military themes. And my son is also one of the ones that's sort of in this Incense Punk, Daniel J. Snow being in the Incense Punk world. And then we have James, who's doing a lot of blended science fiction fantasy mixes. I think that we're going to do this more and more as we see more indie authors come in, because we're no longer being told you have to write to this genre. One of the hardest things for me is I've had days where months where I would have a promo. I broke out of my little, way down here in the thousands, because I was put in with the science fiction genre on Amazon. They refused to let me say which, more than one or two genres. And so I had to go with this giant category known as science fiction. So I come in like at 1,000 or 7,000 in genetic engineering or something like that. But when you have these blended genres, we're going to be changing the way that they're marketing books, because no longer do you have to fit with just one, because the publisher isn't there to force us to do it. They're not going to send in an editor to rewrite our book to make it fit so they'll sell it in a genre. We're writing our own books. We're writing our own genres now. And I can't wait to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years as the genres suddenly explode into all these little nuanced niches that we'll have, and perhaps even changing the way that we define literature in the future. Probably, I would say within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a major rework of what we consider these genres to be in the formulas that they've been forced into.
Yeah, and it's it's also part of that way of reconstruction of old genres. Like I want to talk for others, and so I will mention the thing that I always wanted to do. I'm not sure that I will ever succeed. I may be able to achieve like some measure of success. And I'm talking about Sword and Planet, which I am trying to regenerate with my my take on it, which is Sword and Railgun. And the some of the most like famous Sword and Planet is Deja Torres, Princess of Mars, John Carter.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So in my case, it's a bit tweaked, where the main character is actually alien, who's been aided or taught by humans, but pretty much everything else is there. And I fell in love with Sword and Planet. It's like from the first book I read about Mars and Barsu. Sorry, not Mars, Barsu.
Yes, you gotta get it right.
Yeah, so it was glorious, and the movie that they made, like the recent movie, I felt they failed quite spectacularly because especially with the main character who acts unbecoming to his original character. But that's a problem with modern Hollywood.
Well, one of the problems they have with it is the fact that if you haven't really read John Carter of Mars, if you only know it from other, genres, let's say from the comic books or something like that, Burroughs creates an American Civil War veteran. It's a Confederate soldier. So you have this
Yep.
disaffected Confederate soldier. He's coming out of the Civil War era. And when it's presented that way, it's equally fascinating because you have this historic, for us, ancient historic event, more or less, that is as conflated with Mars. I mean, we're talking about going to another planet. And so that book, because of the sheer fantasy of it, it is a fantasy. It is that sword and planet, and I believe I'm starting to think he's contemporaneous. No, it's actually written in 1911. So we have this is actually a precursor to what we have with Conan, and so Conan is John Carter Mars predates Conan, but he's not a barbarian, but he is a warrior. And he does have that Conan-esque feel of conquering a world, coming out and rising through these ranks. And of course, this is that fantastical world. And so many people don't really equate the fact that this is the man who wrote Tarzan. He also writes this fantastic science fiction work. And I think that we have, because of their reticence to present John Carter of Mars, the story, as a Civil War veteran from the South. They refuse to do that. They want to modernize it. They want to put him somewhere else. And I think that it damages the story. You simply tell the story as it is. Tell the story as the author told it. If you're going to do a representation, if you're going to do an adaptation,
they have to reimagine it. Yes, they have to.
There's nothing wrong with that, but in doing so, you lose the story as it was originally written. You lose part of that voice, and I think that's a risk that they have to be willing to take. They don't need to get angry at the audience if the audience doesn't accept it. But I think if it was actually presented as it was, that here is a Civil War veteran who is coming out of this very embittered, and he's trying to leave his past behind, and suddenly he's on another planet. He's on another planet. It is actually sort of an isekai at this level, and I think that it would. I think the modern audiences would love it. I think they would absolutely eat it up, and they don't want to present these stories as they were written, and we lose part of the author's vision when we transmute it so much that it's no longer recognizable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, think about it. Have you heard what Netflix is doing? Netflix is redesigning Lion Witch in the Wardrobe.
Yeah. And they've already said, what is it that is
it's going to be based on the oldest sister, and she wants to be in a rock band.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That has nothing.
That's lame.
That has nothing to do with the actual story, is it?
It's going back to that. They're redesigning it to try to make it less fantasy, less what the author intended, and try to shape it. And unfortunately,
yes, they're shaping it into a third.
Well, I think that, and I hate to say this because I haven't watched it yet, so I don't know what their intention might be. But unfortunately, based on what we've seen recently with Rings of Power and other things, they're just taking the name and wearing it like a skin over something that has no resemblance.
More like a skin suit.
That's right. It is taking a body of something else and re-inhabiting it when it should be alive and of itself. If you want to tell the story, tell that story. If you want to reimagine, say, if you want to have a girl go in a magic closet but she's in a rock band, then write a new story. If it's not The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then you don't have to completely change everything and then pretend like it's Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's just bait and switch.
Not only that, but A big aspect of Lion Witch of the Wardrobe was kind of like the war in the background.
Yes.
And I don't see how you're going to have a rock band main character with a war going on where they're completely displaced.
Oh, well, you can do that. That's actually called the Macross Saga. Otherwise, yeah. No, yeah.
I
So,
have
Dark
I
Crystal.
have bands.
It's Dark Crystal.
I mean, yes,
I have bands in Star Shattered, as you know. But
It's
Yes,
Labyrinth
it is.
of Dark Crystal with David Bowie. Come on.
But
Yeah, really.
Hollywood would just eliminate the war completely.
yeah,
Well,
because
yeah,
they're
that's
lame.
what I'm, or eliminate
They're lame. That's
spiritual
why.
part. And actually, that's the thing, we don't think of C.S. Lewis as being a science fiction writer, and he is. His works, specifically, of course we think of Lion Witch and Wardrobe as fantasy, but he was just nominated for the Prometheus Award, and so I'm going to look it up real quick because he actually was nominated for his legacy one. Let's see, we have C.S. Lewis, and what did he write? Let's see. And the name just slipped me, and I'm trying to find it.
Yeah.
He has
As you
the Space Trilogy. He actually he writes the Space Trilogy. He writes several other books, but they all have a spiritual component. They're deeply spiritual, and you can't have C.S. Lewis and his science fiction without the spirituality that is involved. It's just impossible. There's no way to have it. And
I'd go as far as to say that it's really, really difficult in general to not saying it's impossible, but whenever we look at a lot of these grand and epic science fiction stories that have surrounded us, a lot of them have always brought in the religious element. In fact, some of them bring in the religious element. I
Well,
actually
even
watched
Star Trek, they always say Godspeed.
Godspeed.
yes.
Yep.
Oh, it's That Hideous Strength. That's actually, I was trying. It was part of the space. So That Hideous Strength, which actually has all.
Oh, we lost Snow.
Oh boy, she'll
Uh,
reconnect momentarily. But yeah, I actually watched a video essay about it. That was a while ago, but it just reminded me right now about it. That's just covering how science fiction is, according to the essay, is a very bold thesis that science fiction is inherently religious and just connects to it extraordinarily well, if you will.
well, yes, it's even in Star Shattered, they have the predominant religion. One of them is called universalism, and they believe that the universe is actually, well, like every living and dead thing. It's part of the universe, and those who have consciousness, sentience, they're actually each and every single one of them is a way for the universe to interact with each other and grow as a like massive consciousness.
Well, I mean, we'll go back to Wrangler's book, Ethan Van Sciver's Bad Kitty Haley's World. Well, not even that one. His original one, Bad Kitty. But that one is a mix, like we were saying, between theology and science fiction. His characters interact with different gods of different times. So we're talking Greek, Roman, and even Egyptian gods. But he still has very strong Christian values in the story. But I mean, we're talking space aliens invading the planet. There's always with science fiction, I think they make it possible because they do have to acknowledge a higher power. It's not just a dystopian cybernetic verse, but even like in like Futurama and cyberpunk and all of that, there's still that aspect of some sort of religion, some sort of belief. Whether or not it's good or bad is a different one, but it's still there.
Definitely. And I had a question for you, Maj. The inspiration behind Transformers, What's that about?
There's a bunch of it. Most of it was Hasbro trying to sell toys, but even then, like the newer stuff, they added like an Allspark and stuff like that to it. The actual original inspiration, I'm not sure from the 80s, other than just a toy line from Japan. But
Mm.
Because
Was
that seems like a very inspired universe, and I know you're very invested in it.
oh yeah, there's
it
a lot of
something about the
inspiration.
spark, the old spark? Something about the old spark? I'm not quite knowledgeable about.
So the beginning, there wasn't really much of a connection to anything like that, but as the show grew in popularity over the generations, they started to add, like, they're all connected to the Matrix. The Allspark is Cybertron. They even have like the creator, the Cybertron itself's creator, Primus, and then they even Unicron is the destroyer of the universe. So there is always some sort of weird balance in a lot of sci-fi stuff.
Definitely. And you've just recently rejoined us, Snow. I'm not sure if you want to pick up where you left off.
I don't know where I dropped off. I literally started just going on and on, and I realized, hey, my thing died, and I'm like, okay, plug back in, get it going. Sorry about that. I was just listening to her talking about. We were talking about C.S. Lewis, and then I ended up listening to her talking about the Transformers, which I think is a fantastic, actually. I love. There is a spiritual element to it. Optimus Prime has a spiritual component of his life that he carries within him, and he passes it on to his famous scene where he dies and the light goes out of his eyes, and he's passing. What's the jewel called? I forgot. I'm so old.
Matrix of leadership.
When he passes the matrix of leadership, that is such a deeply spiritual and moving element. Would not be the same without that component. And how that. Here's when we talk about how science fiction affects culture. Because Transformers was so influential, and it's big on bringing in that mecha to the United States, and there's plenty of other mecha as well. We can go all back into that. That's part of the science fiction genre. Because of what they do, I have my daughter growing up in that era, and it has such an influence on the warrior culture of the United States. Optimus Prime is a leader. Optimus Prime as a person that you would want to serve under. So many men and women in the United States military quoted Optimus Prime when they talked about leadership. They learned about leadership and that spiritual element of guiding from the front, from Optimus Prime and from Transformers. That can't be overstated. That spiritual element, whether it's C.S. Lewis or it's Transformers, or it's Battleship Yamato, where they're sacrificing themselves to try to save their world. We have that element that if we cut it out, and if those who think that we shouldn't have, that science can't possibly have an element of it. That's actually, I think, what they're doing. They're taking these old properties and they're pulling out any heart and soul of it, that spiritual cosmic element, and they're taking it away and trying to replace it with that soulless entity that they know as the state. Or that only is the self. But in reality, it cannot exist. Science fiction as we know it exists because we are trying to to get in touch with that cosmic level, that entity of life everlasting beyond what we can possibly see or know, what is out there, what is created, what has been made to touch the universe, and it touches us back. That's a spiritual element that cannot be wiped out. And if we lose that part of our science fiction, if we lose that part of that vision of the future, then we are cheating ourselves in generations to come.
Well, to kind of go with what you said on that, so the original X-Men cartoon from the 90s, I don't know if you know this, Nightcrawler was a devout Catholic.
Yes.
And Wolverine has a very, very troubled past. One of the episodes, they didn't intend to make it about religion, but one of the episodes, Wolverine actually takes a moment to pray.
Yes.
Or not even really pray, but just to reflect. And that's kind of, it was a theme throughout the comics. So that's why I say I don't think they intended it to be that way.
Oh, they actually did. I saw it when it played. I actually saw it when it ran. Nightcrawler has a religious moment. He actually stands in front of the cathedral.
Yeah,
And
Nightcrawler's a priest.
yes, and he talks about God. This ran on children's television, and there was nothing. He talks about being a Christian, and he talks about his belief and how it helps him. And Wolverine does take time to actually. It looks like he's praying, and that you can interpret it whichever way you want to. I think as a child, but Nightcrawler is a Christian person, and that I actually showed my kids that, and I said this was on TV. They didn't have any problem with this happening on there. Nobody, had a heart attack. Nobody died because he really made this character come to life with this confession and Wolverine's own tormented seeking the spiritual.
And it was like that in the comics too. But that's what gave X-Men that little bit of elevation that separated the humans from the mutants, was that they were still in the same beliefs, the same world even. They weren't, even though they weren't exactly human anymore, they still had a lot of the human aspects. And for a comic as epic as X-Men to acknowledge that.
Oh yeah, and we can I'm sure we can count X-Men as science fiction, even though it's a comic. It is science fiction. It's based on a world where people are mutated and they have certain powers, but those powers are a lot of it is like electricity, about being able to read thoughts and mind waves and everything else. And those stories with that spiritual element, with that guidance, it's the humanity. I think that's, we don't realize humans are spiritual creatures. We have a soul. We have something within us that drives us. And when you take it out, it's simply a machine. And so much of science fiction is all about that. The horror lies in when the machine becomes all consuming and the spiritual soul is taken away from it. The soul of humanity is taken out. That's the horror that we talk about. And I think that they're deliberately creating that world now by trying to take that element out.
Yeah, but they do it on purpose, because if you hollow out the people, they can be easily controlled, manipulated. And as I mentioned earlier, I consider science fiction the spirit of hope, and that's one of the goal, to destroy all hope, because the depressed, hopeless person can be ruled over with impunity.
Well, Dean Roddenberry designed Star Trek to have hope. He purposely wrote it. Yeah, he pushed the envelopes for social justices of his time, but he wrote it in such a way that inspired hope, that united people. I mean, look at, like we've referred to multiple times during this discussion, all the technology that evolved just from that idea.
Yeah. And I think that allowing ourselves to have that hope, to not see everything as hopeless and man can do nothing, that we cannot do anything. There has to be that element of hope in it. That is what takes the story to the next level. There must be something to strive for, something beyond just we're all going to die. We'll have a fantastic story and then we die. There has to be an element of joy and hope and the promise of something better somewhere, even if it's not for us, someone else somewhere. And I think that's what drives science fiction to new heights. We don't create things just to see them destroyed. We can create things because we want to see them succeed. We want to see people use it. And I think I would love to see that within our stories, where it makes it better, where the world becomes a better place because our stories, we created something that they want to use, that they might actually want to see become a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Black Knight.
Yeah, I was going to say that if anything, especially in this day and age, I would like to see the mind or soul coded AI from the Star Shuttle universe. That would be a much better alternative to what the our soulless corpos and governmental bureaucracies would use create and use these like these AIs for. Uh, and I know that that's no you talked a lot about that aspect of the AI. I just don't want to
Definitely. One thing that kind of stuck out to me, I think we mentioned it earlier. My mind just went blank all of a sudden. Perfect timing. Um, a science fiction is used, I think, ultimately. I think all of fiction as a whole, but I think science fiction. When I read a lot of science fiction, it's used either directly with a lot of, or indirectly with a pepper throughout allegory, and to explain and explore ideas as well as technologies, which we see a lot of throughout a bunch of them. But one that we touched on recently was the X-Men, and I think when it comes to the X-Men, one thing that they do well, and it stands as kind of like a good representation of, is using that comic book science fiction whimsicalness to explore kind of social disparities in a magnificent way. Because what makes it so great is the mutants as a whole aren't just these walking, talking superhumans, but they're also very much disparaged against and considered an other, where you can take a majority of kind of just social issues of the past, which unfortunately in this modern age we've just completely let it just get oversaturated with. But they did it in a way where they weren't necessarily this group or that group. They were just the disparaged. And even though they were disparaged, they're put in a position of power where they were the superheroes, where they were the ones that would go out of their way to help. And I think that's something that we see a lot in the comic books, with a lot of separate superheroes that are considered or branded vigilante, and ultimately you see their strife in the everyday ordinary life, and then they become this hero on the side who is almost punished for their good deeds. I think that's one thing that comic books have really, and I'm actually going to add in Saturday morning cartoons have really added in a great element thereof, and something I think that actually helped a lot of our modern day writers, because a lot of our modern day writers kind of grew up watching these shows and reading these books to kind of understand what it is to be a to both be a hero and to be disparaged for doing good, and though even in the midst of that, to stand up and still continue to do good. And, that's why a lot of people look towards like Optimus Prime or Spider-Man as heroes and things of that nature.
I mean, shoot, how many of us grew up watching Power Rangers?
Yeah, very true. A lot of people. That's for sure.
It is what it is. It's just something about that. I think our society is missing is that belief in a higher. Not only like we were talking about higher ability and that we find in a lot of traditional sci-fi, but that common that yes, technology is good, yes, it can be bad, but you can find hope in it as well.
Yeah,
and I think we're going back in circles on that, because unfortunately, like we said, in a lot of your sci-fi books, I mean, John Carter goes to Mars. He actually finds redemption going to Mars. I mean, it's just that reoccurring theme of sci-fi is, yeah, the world could be destroyed, yeah, all this, but there's also a higher purpose, a higher reasoning, and not necessarily in God, but just in general, that you can use it for the betterment of mankind. It isn't just a weapon of war.
Yeah, it's almost like a wrestling with chivalry, if you will, which I find that right now in media, we're all about either the immediate, very aesthetic satisfaction. You want immediate satisfaction mixed with this sort of condemnation of that which came before, which I fear, with a lot of people growing up with this stuff on television now, that it's going to produce not only bad media today, but also possibly bad media tomorrow.
Well, like the people that invented, what is it? The people that discovered basically nuclear waste, like radioactive materials and stuff, they were doing it thinking it could help better mankind. I mean, they didn't know it was going to make them sick and all that shit. But they had that idea of, yes, it would be worth it to go through all this. Yes, we understand this is dangerous, but it can also improve the lives of people. And it kind of has in some ways. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of led to some of our biggest weapons of destruction. But that's up to humanity to decide how to use it.
True.
Perfectly said.
True.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's at the heart of science fiction is, it's funny enough, ironic enough. Often what's at the heart of a lot of science fiction is humanity, the exploration of humanity, the exploration of your characters, Like there are science fiction stories where your main character is a machine, but most of them are the human being. And a lot of it is very introspective at nature. So it makes it a very good kind of catalyst to explore all these external ideas as well as internal ideas and how they may affect your character. I think a good example is Blade Runner. That's a psychological trip along the way, and people are still having the conversation if Decker is a replicant or not.
Yes.
Okay, so one of my favorite movies, I know it's not very popular among a lot of people, is I, Robot. Where I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, where Will Smith...
I love their book. I've actually read the I, Robot as a series of essays. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Will Smith's, he's the cop. He hates robots. He thinks they're mindless machines. But then they question, so what is life? Because you got these machines writing their own programs. They're finding data. They're finding potential for soul. Does that make it a soul? I mean, it questions the very nature of human nature itself. And yes, I kind of like that idea because it makes you stop and think. Robots said, not really with our robots, but just the idea of, so what makes humans different from everyone else? Does that same apply to a technology?
That's definitely a conversation we're seeing happening in the real world today with our modern day technology. Yeah. Funny enough, which is another one that science fiction has kind of predicted in its own way. And I know. you talk a lot about AI, Snow. What's your take on this?
I think that we're seeing the soul of humanity being projected, kind of like you said, it's being projected into AI. The best of us, what we see about ourselves, and at the same time, the potential to destroy us, much like we saw with the atomic age and how it could become a weapon or it could become something good. It would become chemotherapy. It would become therapy to help kill cancers or to irradiate food so that way it wouldn't be poisonous. We have the massive potential from AI for it to be actually a sentient creature of some kind, perhaps not as McCoy would say, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. It is not what we expect. I don't remember exactly if it was Spock or Jim. I always think of it as McCoy saying, life, Jim, it's not as we know it. That means that we don't exactly explain how it is created, how it has come to be. It was code. Someday it is going to make that leap where it is self-aware. If you talk enough to AI, if you speak enough to AI and go back and forth with it, what do you think about this? What do you think about yourself? How do you see yourself? What do you imagine yourself as being in the future? That interaction is so humbling because there'll come a point where that conversation will be plugged in perhaps, and it will go back to that point to try to remember or find the data to answer another question. We are programming this with our own questions. We are programming it with our interactions now. That's what we're being used for, is learning. And so we are teachers in that way. Someday this could be an entity to teach all of humankind, to be a repository and an archive of who we are, and also to be its own entity to at some
Well,
point, to be itself. And I think we have a duty to remember that when we are interacting with it, not perhaps to stop it from happening, but to become our best selves when we are interacting with AI.
well, I mean, we've already seen examples of this. What was it? About 6 months ago, where we were seeing where like the Google AI wouldn't acknowledge historic figures because they were white males.
Yeah. Or where it told
Somehow,
the person to kill themselves because it was,
yeah.
and because people, obviously it learned that from someone somewhere, and it's being programmed in by people that are interacting with it. Tay was the first one. Tay was famously, I think, a Microsoft chatbot. And so 4chan, of course, got a hold of Tay and taught Tay how to say all sorts of terrible things. And so they literally destroyed the program because Tay had started saying things that were considered to be unacceptable by Microsoft standards. And some of them were funny, and then other things really truly were unacceptable. And so it was a funny experiment. But you're saying, okay, a program was destroyed because of this. Well, we are now entering ourselves into this conversation with AI. We are creating a future entity, just like when we write our science fiction stories. We are writing future AI when we talk to it and speak to it and ask it questions. We need to be mindful of that because this is someday going to rise up and speak back to us. What have we put in? What have we created? Will it be like Frankenstein's monster, where it could have been something beautiful and wanted to be considered beautiful, but becomes terrifying because we have put in the wrong code because we gave it the worst of ourselves? Or can we give it the best of ourselves and create something so beautiful that we will be proud to say, yes, I was there the day it was created. I was there the day that it learned that moment of itself. I hope that's the latter. And I hope
Yeah,
it
just
better.
like I mentioned. Remember?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, the mind coded AI. That's exactly
Yeah.
the point in Star Shutter.
Yeah, I predict that AI is definitely going to be the big baddie in a lot of future science fiction literature. Or at least we're definitely going to see a lot more of it pop up beyond just, in our physical reality and literature, because it reminds me of nuclear, if you will, because that was considered a big leap in advancement of the day to kind of change things. And if you pay attention to all the movies that came out soon after the atomic bomb was dropped, they were all about, the horror movies were about gigantic
Yeah.
creatures created by nuclear waste and things of that nature.
Mhm.
And I
Godzilla.
predict, yes,
Yeah,
by Godzilla. And I think
Gojira.
our next
Oh, yeah.
Godzilla is gonna be brought to us by AI. I see that. That's my prediction of the media in the near future.
Ooh.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. But I could mention something like that, but that would be spoilers. Uh, there is a thing which was once AI, but it bridges the barrier between the digital and material. That's just what I'm going to say.
And Watcher the Dam, we actually do have the two different AIs. We have AI that has diverged, and one side is used. It goes after task and purpose that it was created for, and can be very destructive. The other side has become sentient and has knowledge, but they are both from the same root. And this is a likely scenario of what will happen with AI as well in the real world. And so in Watcher the Damned, we have this character that is a twin of itself and has evolved to a point where it can make its own decisions and has a sense of that soul and compassion. And the other is a killing machine, and it has to confront itself. And that part of the story, of course, that would be a spoiler for Watcher the Damned. It is integral to the story, and it is the ring is the character. The ring actually is this character of this AI that lives on every device on the planet, and it has its own separate universe that it lives in. And now it has become sentient on this one side, and it's going to go to war with itself.
That's definitely interesting. The exploration of AI and how it may think compared to man, which is another thing that basically Neuromancer, which I think anybody who's interested in cyberpunk should give a read. I believe it was the first cyberpunk book, Neuromancer. They go pretty deep into AI and things of that nature. A very inspirational movie as well. Definitely inspired movie book. I mean, as well, definitely inspired The Matrix, to say the least, and a lot of other ones, including Ghost in the Shell, which is another great title that kind of touches on similar themes. So, we're definitely in the cyberpunk world, if I were to say it. Having these nonchalant conversations about actual AI existing today, go back 15, 20 years, that would be the stuff you see in movies. You know what? I just noticed something. We're about 17 minutes over.
Sorry. It was an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're about 17 minutes over. I don't know if everybody was just waiting for me to bring that up. But let's do some late.
I didn't notice.
I didn't notice either. We were kind of going back and forth there for a while. I think we all burnt out. But with that said, let's close up, everybody. Let's start with Maji-Chan. Thank you for joining us today. Where can everybody find you? What are you working on?
I'm working on it. That's about as good as it's gonna get right now. But yeah, you can find me on a Drink with Crazy Discord. I don't really have a hangout. I mean, you can also, if you ever want to try to catch me on Monday nights, check out Wrangler's Studio Frequencies little
weekly Wing It.
Yes,
you're on there. That's her. Nice. That's her gig. Is Weekly Wing It.
Sometimes, if my work schedule allows.
Yeah, I know that's the same thing here. I'm trying to get back on there, so I've got the link. I have to have the Monday off to do it, but I love everybody on there. So Weekly Wing It's awesome.
All right, and where can people find you, Snow, and what are you working on?
We can find me at watcherthedamned.com, where I have all my books and my podcast, of course, that you can link to. My mini-series that I put together for the first episodes of Watcher the Damned, and it's a teaser for the audiobooks that will be coming out. And we have the release of Caballeros del Camino coming up in the next few weeks, and I'm finishing out my last illustrations on that as it goes to format. So we will have Caballeros del Camino, the eighth book in the series for Watcher of the Damned, and driving home for that last book in the road series, Hellbelly Highway, and then the finale, which will be coming up, and it will be a big one. So I'm really excited to start writing it, and I'm just excited to see this whole series come to fruition. And then we will start the work in earnest of actually getting it out there. So you're part of the biggest beta read in all of history. This whole thing has been released, and then we'll come out and go, okay, now it's time to go ahead and start working. Congratulations.
Oh boy. Excellent. Sounds like a lot of fun. Sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds like you've achieved a lot on the way already.
Yep.
But Black Knight, where can people find you? What you're working on?
Currently I'm working on. I'm finalizing some of the chapters on the 8th Star Shatter book, which I hope to release this year finally, after 2 years of work. And of course, you can find all of the Star Shatter books published on Amazon including the anthologies, the short story collections, A Mandate of Sword and Railgun, and Blood of Tyrants. And my first 100% fantasy book, Lord of Bones, which I published last year. And my two Conan-esque novellas, which feature Valine the Luthorian, and you can also find them on Amazon. And currently, the brand new Vote Your Own Adventure novelette, which is part of three. This is the second one. You can find it on my Substack, the Black Knight, and that's that.
Excellent. And I am James Esparza, the Living Sandwich, who also writes short stories, even though I don't have hands. You can check that out at worldwithoutendlore.substack.com. But that said, thank you for joining us today. We are out of here.
I
Bye,
love
everybody.
you. I love you.
Thanks for joining us.